Hey everyone, I'm Clue, and well, we're on the Flesh and Blood Reddit. This is sort of where I get the majority of my information. I do go through the normal Fab homepage, read the articles there. I don't use Twitter, so I don't keep up to date with stuff on there. I think I have a Twitter for the channel. I can't remember if it's in the description, but yeah, I'm really bad at utilizing it. I don't really look through stuff there. There is a lot of information all the time, right? So I find the Reddit is just significantly the better place because, again, that hive mind collective where not only do you have people posting about it, but you have everyone discussing it. And scrolling through, we have this little constant changes to the LL points per win, right? So this is definitely a topic worth discussing, and we touched upon it when we read the change article, and I voiced my opinion. My opinion is the minority, right? But I do think there are some valid points, and obviously the comment section is really good to read through on a topic like this. So I thought we just spend some time, and I think I'll do this more often. We'll just look through Reddit and spend a little bit of time discussing and looking over the posts there, because there are some really good ones, right? So constant change to the LL points per win. I'm not the type to complain, but I am really bothered how constantly LSS changes the LL points. When I feel like playing a hero, I check the LL points to see how much fun and how long I get to play them. The last skirmish season gave 1 point per win, now 4. Before they announced the 4-point change, I just went all in on a Cat's-Eye deck on the idea that she isn't going anywhere till next year, right? So that's definitely a rough one to pick because, well, not only is Cat's-Eye probably popular from what I've seen, right? But it's also one of the better decks aside from just Kano. And then you also have the fact that now she's the front runner of heavy hitters. So regardless of us getting a new Cat's-Eye, there's probably going to be support there for old Cat's-Eye. And with the point change, right, she's probably not going to survive as long as what this person had hoped. And I'm sure that's down there in the comments. But in terms of the changes, right, this is definitely a valid point, but I can understand the criticisms because this will get a lot of criticisms, right? Because, there needs to be a little bit of tact, and I've learned that myself, right? You can't just say things blatantly. You need a little bit of tact in how you're sort of going about complaining, right? Because LSS are a wonderful company, right? And a lot of the stuff they do, they know what's going on and they have it planned out. But again, I will circle back to the whole information aspect where we as the community don't know why, right? Cool, we have 15 heroes. Cool, you want them to cycle more. Cool, so you've changed the Living Legend, right? We connect the dots when they could just straight away give us all the proper information, right? These are the heroes that are going to come out. These are the heroes where we're identified as being, sort of the high end of the meta, and we want it a bit more evenly distributed. So we're doing this to sort of ramp up hero rotation, right? Those sort of aspects. They're speculative thoughts that we, the community, have that have never been, proven to any extent by LSS, regardless of how close to the truth they might be. So I think, again, a little bit more information would be really nice as to why and what the plan is. But nonetheless, right, we'll read through some of the comments. So it seems like they're trying to cycle heroes more often. Cat's-Eye is close to LL, but we have a new Cat's-Eye coming in Feb with the heavy hitters set. Yep, fantastic. That is definitely the goal in mind. I would ask, though, right, at what point does it not just become better to do a rotational system, right? I understand the idea of keeping cards usable. I think we all got it in our head a slightly different. So Prism is probably the best example because we have a direct carbon reprint of Prism, right? Chain and Visette are a little bit different, but Prism is Prism, right? So in that aspect, it's not like Prism is old Prism. It's a completely new deck. Your hero ability alone lends itself to playing the new Archangel, right? So the stylization of the deck and the cards that fit it, there'll be some overlap, but it is its own hero. It's not really Prism, right? So for all intents and purposes, normal Prism or old Prism is gone, is in the Living Legend format, right? And the cards that excelled in her, while they might be okay in new Prism, aren't going to get back to the point they were with old Prism, right? So in terms of the value aspect and trying to preserve that, that's always going to be an issue, right? Because no cards are going to be one-to-one, because then they're just reprinting the same hero and the same decks is going to pop up, right? So that can't happen. And because of that, there's no good way of preserving the value of cards and the value of collections with the Living Legend system. So again, I would argue, right, this is sort of like sticking a Band-Aid on a leak, right? It's good, but it's not going to last forever. So yeah, I would ask, right, what is the point of not just swapping to a rotation, every 2 years or 1 year, all the X sets, all their heroes go to Living Legend, and everyone else. I think it's cool, the Living Legend format. I like the concept. I'm not the biggest fan of its execution, however. I think it's a turning point. I'm sure they know better than us how many heroes will be around and for how long. Yeah, again, I wish they'd let us in. That's, again, my biggest complaint is the way information is delivered by LSS. I think it could be a little bit better. Constant change, it's only changed like twice in 3 years. They're still figuring out figuring out what works best. Now, I understand this criticism. 3 years to shake things up is still, fairly decent, right? Every year and a half. That is basically equivalent to rotation. So it's more the norm, and point change is a big thing, especially if you think in terms of growth. Any point changes that we've got that have advanced the amounts of points gained, you compare that with the actual population growth in the community of players, and that change is actually more substantial than you might think. Go back 2 years, and these point values wouldn't accumulate like they are going to now with the current changes. So I do think, while an okay criticism this is, the OP does have somewhat of an actual point. So sorry, I just started this year and I was present when it was 2 points, then 1, then 4, right? So again, it's all about tact, as I'm finding. The number of players and events is changing fast. That's why they're trying to accommodate. Yeah. It's definitely become very apparent that the competitive scene has sort of taken off more than they expected, right? Especially if you think about the plans they sort of laid out in the initial era, right? And to what we have now, we're definitely solely focused on the competitive scene more so than anything else. And that's fantastic, right? Because again, competitive scene translates to what people can actually do to actually turn this into a livable job, which is fantastic to see, right? It's so rewarding, even just as an onlooker, to see people be able to do something like play Flesh and Blood as a full-time gig. That is fantastic. And, that's thanks to LSS funneling all of their creative juices and their funding into the competitive scene, right? So it is a good thing, but at the same time, when growth comes out of your hands, right, drastic change is needed. When, we saw the boom from the first Ed Unlimited model, right, that then had to be morphed into 2.0. More or less, change has to happen. Whether or not it's the best thing, though, that's sort of more open-ended for us to think about and discuss. I agree with your particular situation sucks, but it's more a time reason. Yeah, people are always going to be on both sides of the coin, right? So believe me, a lot of TCG players have regrets not having waited one more day, or the opposite, right? Buying into something that then skyrockets. You can also understand that some players are facing the same issues. All right, I think that's a better way of putting it. In the tabletop, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I would also have preferred not to face chain this season, blah, blah, blah. You can also understand that some people are facing the same heroes in top table of each of their skirmish since 2 years, and that's the blitz rotation was clearly too slow. I would also have preferred not to face chain this season because of a little adjustment making him less popular instead of just having him being thrown away. Yeah, it is kind of weird if you think about how long each hero has had their time to shine, right? I mean, you have Stravo, who was the quickest to be banned, was he not? And at that point, it's like, well, was it okay to just chuck him aside rather than, put in heavy erratas or ban cards to actually slow it down and give each hero, 1 to 2 years to breathe before they get rotated out? So again, back to that question, right? The current Living Legend, the current way heroes are played with and, tossed aside, lack of better words, would a rotational be a little bit better? Again, with the rotation, then, erratas and bans would have to be a lot more prevalent to make sure that they don't get out of hand, right? And you're not just stuck with X hero dominating for those years. The LL distribution will continue to be changed as more products such tournaments enter the system. Yeah, definitely, right? There's going to be more events next year than this year and so forth and so on. And again, those points are going to accumulate, right? So the changes, again, going back to the one up here, are more impactful than you might think because of the population growth more than anything. And the old cards aren't useful for the new hero that they make to replace the Living Legend cards. I'm honestly really disappointed in the new cast. It seems cool, sure, but LSS really have just said, you're going to need to buy a new deck of cards exclusively from heavy hitters. Yes, again, it's a bittersweet thing because there is no way to do it. If you make a carbon copy so all the cards are still applicable, then you're going to run into the same issues of them dominating the meta. At the same time, creating a new hero from scratch isn't really, a replacement. Sure, the specializations are probably the main element that LSS are trying to preserve, but it's still going to, you know, create a decent chunk of obsolete cards and completely mess with the value of things. There'll also be Living Legend Blitz format soon. Yeah. Living Legend, right? I think Living Legend needs those erratas and bans. I mean, the World Cup Stravo is probably a big case in point, right? And in its current format, that's all it's ever going to be, unless they go heavy with those erratas and bans, or they do a rotation for Living Legend, or they do Living Legend, but then that's even weirder. I would almost like to see like a seasonal system for Living Legends, right? During this season, X hero is playable, right? And they look through the decks and they understand the matchups and they handcraft it to some extent, right? This is the season of blah, 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 or the area, or whatever you want to call it, and you're meant to play these. Sort of like a time walking in World of Warcraft. Not that I've ever actually played during that era, but, you know, I've heard people are fond of it, right? Going back to the other zones and raids. There will be a Living Legend. Nope, that's what you already read. They already explained that they want heroes to rotate out quicker. Yes, and then the 15 new heroes. Again, it's a great thought, but what heroes are they replacing? Are they going to be one for the ones that are going to rotate out faster, right? What's the go there? Do we have any sort of understanding for that? Are they going to actually, again, bring back the majority of Elemental Guardian cards? Because right now there's no pilot for Elemental Guardian, so all those cards are just trickling down and down and down in value, right? Don't let the facts get in the way of a good complaint session. Also, all these people with top-of-the-line meta decks seem to forget LL format will be a real thing soon. Yeah, again, only the top of the top will shine, more or less, for that. Just enjoy Cassine Blitz until she LLs, then play her in LL Blitz. The other thing with LL, right, and Blitz to some extent too, the majority of resources get funneled into Classic Constructed, right? Again, that's a good thing, but I would sort of like to see all areas of competitive play have not equivalent growth, but a lot more growth, right, to make them all worth playing to the extent of Classic Constructed. Because to that extent, Classic Constructed is like the breadwinner, and then all the other formats are like this little novelty thing. It's cool to win them, it's cool to get the prizes, but they're not as consistent in what you can do as a livelihood as Classic Constructed, right? They need a lot more support from LSS. And then that support will also translate to more people playing. And in this scenario, again, the meta rotating a lot quicker. Because right now, again, the point change has been situated around the level of play of Blitz currently, right? So if Blitz ever got extremely more popular, then we'd have to see another change to the actual point distribution. This may be a hot take, but if you invested in Cassite equipment, play Dory from the looks of it. Yeah, okay, that's just a good suggestion for the OP. So you went all in, blah, not very smart, yeah. Beg to differ, Kano and Chain are better. Just disappointed, especially for new players like me who decide to slowly get into the more competitive play. Yes, there is, again, I know a lot of people are saying it's not a hard thing to keep track of. It's a routine, and routines take time to form. For new players, right, there is a lot going on with Flesh and Blood. Not just the Living Legend system, right, not just the competitive scene. There is a lot to digest and understand that continues to grow and expand. Not only do you have the plethora of heroes and classes to think about and understand what you want to play, you then have all the competitive elements to get your head around. So as a new player, right, I do think it is a drastic change, and again, this new barrier for them to, again, not necessarily have a difficult time crossing, but it's just going to take them a little bit to get over. At this point, I prefer a 2 to 3 year rotation. Oh, here we go. This is perfect for what we said. At this point, I would prefer a 2 or 3 year rotation of heroes. It sucks that if you picked up Dash as soon as she was a top deck, you'd be able to play her for over 4 years. It sucks that if you picked up Dash as soon as she was a top deck, you'd be able to play her for 4 years. Okay, so I'm guessing not top deck, they mean as soon as Dash was created, right? If you picked up Levy or Chain, then you get to use them for a bit over 1 year, Chain for about a year. Yeah, so again, it's that life cycle of each hero and how random it is just because of the meta. You can have a hero that sticks around, sees a lot of use, sees lots of applicable play. Sorry, I shouldn't say use, because obviously if it doesn't dominate, then the competitive scene isn't going to see a lot of them. But, you know, a normal player going to their armor, going to the different low-scale events can utilize these decks. and have fun to some extent, right? And yeah, would you rather see every hero have a consistent time frame or what it is currently? That's the question to pose. Vizara is probably going to end up being legal for 5 to 6 years at the current rate of things. Icelander might not get to 2. Dromai doubled her LL points because of the release of 1 card in Bright Lights, which wasn't even an illusionist set. If you buy Vizari now, assuming he'll be legal for a while, there's a chance he gets an insane card in Heavy Hitters or any future expansion, and then makes him LL. Yeah, that's the other thing to interpret, right? The expansion slot means at any point in time, similar to Dromai, right, 1 card can completely change how a hero is played and their rankings. And then that, coupled with the Living Legend system, right, can take a year plan to half a year or so forth and so on, right? It is so variable that if we have the proper information, right, you can say Heavy Hitters is this theme set, the expansion slot will feature cards for blah, 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 blah. You don't have to even say which heroes exactly, you can just say the classes. But there is a level of information we could receive from LSS that would smooth over a lot of these discussions, right? Yep, this game is very abrasive if you want to play it as a side game, semi-casual, at Armory Nights. Yeah, that's the other thing, reshaping your deck. I know, again, it goes back to that whole argument, a lot of cards are transferable between classes, but at the same time, they're not, right? Because a lot of cards are getting cycled out of or competed with, right? I mean, Command and Conquer, Tunic, right? They're still top dogs, but there are also a lot more viable options. If you go for those options, right, that are, a min-max situation over those other cards, you then can't transfer them to X hero. So it is very abrasive for casual people. I would agree, considering I am one of those casual people, right? And I would say the learning aspect is probably the other sort of landslide. Learning different decks, learning the matchups, learning how to play against those matchups, and doing all that and constantly switching, right? I say constantly, that's an over-exaggeration, don't get me wrong, right? But again, going from one hero to the other to the next, not only just transferring the cards and buying new decks, selling off these cards to get these cards, but also then learning how to actually pilot the deck to a decent standard, right, is, again, another barrier for you to slowly climb over. Again, not completely block you, but a slow thing to climb over. To be fair to LSS, the new Living Legend updates don't go into effect until the Friday. Following the update to the leaderboard, technically Chain is still legal for Blitz today. Tomorrow he becomes ineligible for use. The fact that your favorite deck just stops being legal because other people won tournaments with it is a major point of frustration. Yes, that's another thing to sort of consider, is should the Living Legend format be enforced across all states of competitive play, right? Again, there's reasons for both aspects. There's a majority more reasons for having it be enforceable across the board, right? Because of the whole XP system and the way grinding out events works. But at the same time, for a casual person going to an armory, you've just gone to the game. Again, you have to digest all this information. You find a fun deck, you don't realize exactly how the Living Legend system works. You then, try to utilize that deck, and all of a sudden, what if it's banned, right? There are bad case scenarios. Although it's not a hard thing to wrap your head around once you have fully understood, once you have developed that routine for new players. Again, it is not great. The fact that your favorite deck just stops being legal because other people won tournaments with it is a major point of frustration. And then when they release new heroes to replace the old ones, they're totally different. Yes, yeah, that's again the main thing, right? They can't be carbon copies, but they are to some extent their own thing. All right, and which means that it's just a completely new ballpark. Yes, all the cards are valid, but the cards actually see the best use in the new version are going to be radically different. With Chaos Knight, looks like the new set isn't going to have much copper synergy. Yep, since they're all gold tokens. Or, well, if they just chuck in some way to transition gold to silver to copper, right? That's a different story. So is Blood on Hand going to be useless going forward? Yeah, that would really suck, right? If I don't like the idea of specialization cards not being applicable across the different variations. Brian, right, said if you're waiting for a chain replacement and you don't like Visette, maybe you should just not play the game for a while. And yeah, I do kind of want to quit the game. Yes. Again, going back to their development cycle, right? To get even closer to a carbon copy, even to get another attempt at Runeblade, or Shadow Runeblade, I should say, is going to take a while, because they're not going to go Monarch, set monarch, set monarch, right? They're going to really cycle through classes and heroes and subtypes, and it's going to take a long time, right? Especially at 3 sets a year. Even if, again, it tackles, what's the best case scenario? 3, 4, 4, right? Because we already know heavy hitters is 3. So that's what, 3, 7, 11. 11 out of the 12 minus the subtypes, right? So you're almost getting through all classes every year. And that's not to say they're going to introduce new classes, right? So it is a bit of a point of frustration. I fully agree. As someone who misses Icelander and Blitz, I don't think they should be reprinting old LL heroes. My mate is gutted. New Prism isn't anything like old Prism. I don't think any new LL heroes will be. They simply can't. Yeah, this is what we were basically just talking about. But, right, it's how close can they get? That's the big ask for people who want, again, those cards to be usable, the sort of playstyle to be similar. They want it to be close without going overboard. And at that point, again, rotation and heavy erratas and bans, right? They're the alternative scenario. And again, which do you think could be better? Thank you. I couldn't have said it better. This is what I was trying to say. You don't buy into a hero, you buy into a class. No. There's something that's really not emphasized enough. Again, Lexi and Azalea, sure. But you throw in Riptide to the mix and it's yes, there's overlap, but every hero to some extent has a decent chunk, especially the expensive cards, of their own thing. Right, even going back up to, I think, the Dromai, Glistening Steelblade, right, could be cheaper if they actually printed it, but that's probably the case in point, right? Because you'd probably want that over Blood on Your Hands. So, to that extent, sure, the majority of cards there's overlap, but then the staples of X-Hero are usually, more inclined to be for X-Hero, right? Especially as we get more specialized, talking about Riptide with traps, Prism with Archangels, who else? I guess Teklo with Evos, more so than any other class, more so than any other Mechanologist, right? There are definitely a cohort of cards, and it does seem like they are coming up with more specialized heroes. Stealth for Uzari versus Stealth for Arachne, right? Old Arachne, I should say. So there are much more divergence than this statement, I think. Except classes don't always have, there you go, same shit and use the same cards. Chain and Briars, most common playstyle of go wide, multiple attacks a turn, are very much not something Vizari or Vizet do. And even when they do have similar playstyles like Katsu and Faye, both going wide, ninjas that chain attacks, they have very few cards in common. Yes, most of the class cards are only good in one hero deck. Most of the specific class cards, I want to say, right? So the class cards, for instance, one that targets swords, axes for warrior or something like that, right? Again, there's not that great of overlap in Flesh and Blood in cards, even amongst specific classes, because they're going down this path of extreme creativity rather than refinement, from my perspective. That's a bummer, but we have new Kasai and heavy hitters, so probably beat the spike on cards like Cash In. They've been very open about how tweaking the ally point system is an ongoing thing as the game grows and evolves, and those cards you bought will still be useful for the new version of Kasai that comes out in February, give or take, depending on how builds shake up. Yes, very, very give or take. Very, very give or take, right? Especially, again, they give her a two-hand weapon, right? They completely shake up. I haven't actually read Kasai's ability. I should probably do that before I make a ass of myself, right? Right, yeah. So the art is still 2 swords, but in all honesty, the hero ability is open-ended, right? If they gave her a big 2-hander that, was cost 2 or 3, right? I could see something there with a heavy hitting, especially to trigger the gold token, right? But yeah, again, it's very, very much that give or take. As for the openness, yes, right? Again, this is going to be an ongoing thing. There are so many variables to consider: the amount of tournaments, the type of tournaments, type of level of the different tournaments, the amount of players, right? So many factors, the amount of players in each different level of competitive events, right? It's all going to have an impact. So while they're open about the tweaking, again, they could definitely provide a bit more information on their attempted solution, if you will. Looking at other Kasai cards, right? We have the specialization, which is create X cell sword, so that's Nothing to do with your weapon, right? As opposed to current Kasai with blood on hands. Then a bunch of gold generation. Yeah. Even because your main ability is gold generation. I mean, there might be an upgrade to blood on hands, or again, that bridging card for gold to silver, silver to copper. But as it is, right, I do think this is a valid criticism. Again, looking at it from all aspects of play, not just people who are competitive, people trying to get into the game. It is just another thing to wrap your head around, a new routine to form. That was the main issue I had with it, right? That, yes, it's not a big deal to check it every week, but it's a big deal to form that mentality to have to check it week by week, right? Or, keep track of it's at this stage, so now I have to check it week by week and yada yada. So I do think there are obvious arguments to both sides of the coin, and it is something that LSS, right, could provide a bit better information on what the actual plan is. Again, 15 new heroes sounds great until we have a proper understanding of what they are, right? It's all up in the air, especially with what heroes are going to LL, what heroes have LL'd, right? Are they the ones going to be targeted, right? Oldhim, I thought they'd sneak into Dust Till Dawn, given the artwork. Nothing. And it's the same thing at any point in development. We can think, we can speculate, we can come together and say what we would like to see. But at the end of the day, LSS know, and LSS do very little to let us in on that development. Anyway, what do you think? Would you like to see rotation versus just this current tweaking, right? Bans and erratas to try and increase the life cycle of X heroes? Or are you completely fine and just think that with proper refinement and continue to tweak the LL system, it is the best way forward for the game? Hope you enjoyed. See ya.